This is Nicholas Alexiou from the Hellenic American Project, and in the series of oral histories interviews. And today we're very happy and honored and pleased to have a very amazing person, very interesting person who has a history of small migrations and travels in the States and in Europe and in Greece, and writing about it and teaching about it. A very passionate Greek American, Mr. Professor Alexander BILLINIS. Alexander, Mr. BILLINIS, thank you for agreeing having this interview with the Hellenic American Project, and we're looking forward to know more about you and your works and your thoughts about the Greek American community. Welcome to the Hellenic American Project and CUNY College.
Well, thank you very much, Nico. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We've been on panels together. We're both directors of EMBCA, so this isn't the first time. Unfortunately, it would be nice to meet face to face so that we could have a coffee or a stronger drink talk afterwards, but obviously a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
So you were born here in the States. Who came first in the States?
Okay, I was on my mother's side. I am a second generation Greek American. I was the last of 13 grandchildren of my maternal grandparents. My maternal grandfather emigrated. I'm trying to find the exact information because I'm working on a history project about this with the Utah State Historical Society, but I think around 1909, 1910. And like a good portion of Greeks coming to America, he was from the hills above Patras. He followed some cousins to Salt Lake City, which interestingly has a very considerable Greek American community, typically from that area of the Peloponnese, or even more so from Crete. Like 45,000 of his fellow Greeks, he returned to serve his country in the Balkan Wars. And after staying in Greece for about 2 years, married and came back to the US prior to the US or Greece getting involved in World War I. And they raised 5 children. My mother was the last, and I am the last. So I'm the youngest of the youngest. So my paternal grandfather, for example, was born in 1886. So that's a big historical span.
Yes. And your father came from Hydra, you said?
My father was born in Hydra, grew up in Piraeus, went to high school there. His father, after whom I'm named, was killed in the Battle of the Atlantic. And you might recall one of the EMBCA sessions we had, we talked about the Greeks in the Battle of the Atlantic. And my father served in the served in the at what that time was the Royal Navy, the Vasiliko Navtiko, during the latter part of the Civil War, and then spent 5 years as an apprentice captain, and was visiting his uncle, who actually was a sheriff in Salt Lake City. And then he met my mother, and then I was the third child of John and Rita BILLINIS.
Fantastic. So basically, the Greek immigrants at Salt Lake City, they were employed in the mines. The Greek immigration, the history of the immigration there.
Well, it's interesting. Actually, there obviously were employment in mines and railroads, but the Greeks there also quickly moved into small business. In fact, according to third generation Greek American publisher John Saltis, who publishes the Salt Lake City Weekly, actually the number of Greek businesses in the 1920s might be larger than it is today. So it's very interesting that they had a very entrepreneurial spirit from the beginning.
Interesting, yeah, because we have the oral history interviews of Papa Nicola there, right?
Yes.
The famous Greek American researcher, and she studied all this. So you grew up in a very Greek environment. How was your surroundings growing up in Salt Lake City?
It was actually a very American environment. Our language at home was English. We would go to church regularly, and there were 2 churches in Salt Lake. But I had a few friends in my school, primary and secondary school, who were Greek American, but by and large, it was an American upbringing. Certainly we were conscious of being Greek. My father had a shelf of books, especially the Historia του Ελληνικού Ethnos, which was a go-to for me. And Greek, I had a basic facility in Greek, but it was really that once we purchased the house on Hydra and went every summer, that's when my Greek started to improve. I went to Greek school. I did a few, Goya activities, basketball, Greek dance, not very much. Wasn't particularly good at dancing or basketball, but by and large, it was an American upbringing.
So as a child, you're saying that you have visited Greece regularly, let's say every summer. How the locals felt about you? You were the Americans. You are Greeks, Greek Americans. How they received you?
Well, it's interesting. Hydra did not have a big immigration to the United States or to Australia. So it's not like, for example, in Crete, where you had a huge emigre population that would come back and forth, or for example, even some of the Peloponnesian locations where you had major Greek American emigration both ways. It was basically local Greeks, typically involved in shipping or in tourism, and foreigners. And I was neither. So I wasn't technically a foreigner, but I wasn't a local born and raised Greek. So I was the ultimate neither fish nor fowl.
Anything. And of course, as a child, you have great memories from Hydra and Greece in general, right?
In general, although your question also is appropriate, because it was not easy being that intermediate identity that was neither really locally rooted Greek, but I certainly wasn't a foreigner. So it's and I think lots of diaspora Greeks have had similar situations. I'm not suggesting mine was unique, but you didn't have a peer group to draw on while you were there typically.
But do you remember if it was typical for Greek Americans and families and young children to visit Greece from Salt Lake City, or your family was, not in a typical situation visiting Greece?
At that time, it was very atypical. At that time, it was atypical. Now, well, I'm fascinated how it seems to have become normative that everybody visits Greece. And I almost think it's an Instagramization of the Greek experience. But obviously that's a completely different subject. So to your question, No, it wasn't typical. So even among my Greek American peers in Salt Lake City, in some ways, I was more American and in some ways more Greek. So again, you had this somewhat unique situation where I felt very culturally and in a sense legally, and then I became legally Greek when I took Greek nationality. So I looked at Greece as very much a reference point that I belonged to, but I also very much identified as an American, and was quite at home with it, quite comfortable with it.
Yeah. Why it is, or why it was important for you to get the dual citizenship, the Greek nationality?
Well, because first of all, my studies were international business, international banking, so there was the sense that you had benefits there, but also because I felt that Greece is my country, just as the United States, and it is not just my heritage. There's something greater there. In other words, I felt that belonging and, legally belonging to the country was a sense of commitment that went beyond just the ethnic. And of course, it carried certain responsibilities.
Okay. And I hear stories from various people who wish to do that, or they did that, and it was a very lengthy bureaucratic experience. It was the same with you.
Yes, it was. And now I know there's a cottage industry of lawyers that have, they say, cracked the code, and that may very well be the case. In my case, it was a paternal cousin of my father's who did a lot of the navigation to get this going. I mean, in some ways, my father retained, as well as being an American, a very proud American, he retained Greek nationality. So I had all the information I needed. But yes, I mean, it was probably an 8-month process. And I generally hear it's the case now as well. And I think that going through that process, you ought to think things through. Another reason I just thought of why I became a Greek citizen is because I had already studied enough about the Greek diaspora, and I knew that the older diasporas, the ones in Central Europe that I've studied a great deal, or in the Black Sea area, France, Britain, Egypt, and of course in the United States, the commercial diaspora, that for some reason we just don't really talk about, which is another I suppose pet peeve of mine. It was very typical for Greeks abroad to retain Greek nationality. In other words, they were proud of being Greek. They were willing to die for Greece, but not really necessarily willing to live in Greece. And I felt like I was part of that, as we'd say in Greek, that synechia, that continuity.
No, because I'm trying to see your experience with the Greek state. If the Greek state is somehow supportive of Greeks abroad, or because we hear all these, debates, promises, wishes, all this, and I want to get a sense if the Greek state or the bureaucratic apparatus of the Greek state is somehow more or a little bit not lenient but friendly, or to speed up some situations with Greeks abroad. And the other thing connected to that having Greek citizenship, also, since it is a very high in the agenda now, the vote is a big debate to make it easier for Greeks who live abroad vote from the place where they are instead of traveling there. So also your opinion, your thoughts about if the Greeks abroad should grant it that and vote for Greek national elections.
Well, okay, first of all, your first point about the Greek state. My belief is the Greek state does not assist and onboard its diaspora. Now, at certain cases where you've had large scale, immigration into the country, or repatriation, for example, the Greeks of the ex-Soviet Union, there was a process, and there were even certain financial assistances offered. I mean, interestingly, when I served in the army in Greece, in my induction center at Megalopevko, I'd say 15% were born in Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, well, even one in Uzbekistan. So there was a bit of an onboarding, because they also typically had obviously fewer resources than Greeks in Western countries, particularly the United States. They didn't have the cultural, linguistic, financial resources that we had. But that said, and I know this is changing, and my experience is at least a decade old, if not a decade and a half. But my experience was that the Greek state was either indifferent or mildly hostile to its diaspora. In terms of voting, I used to be of the opinion that Greeks abroad, Greek citizens, again, it's not third generation Greek of Greek descent, 1/4, devoted member of the Greek Orthodox Church, which again is not indicative necessarily of a legal nationality in a modern state. They're not part of the discussion. But a guy like me abroad, I used to think, well, we're not subject to the day-to-day life. But the more I think about it, particularly when, I'd paid taxes in Greece, I worked there, I wore the Greek uniform, I think I should be able to vote. And I think that it would also help, because we vote in our municipalities, it would help to change certain things in municipalities. On the other hand, a lot of us don't have the day-to-day concerns. So it's a dilemma, but on that, I recognize the pros and cons, but I fall in favor of Greek nationals abroad being able to vote. I mean, as an American abroad, I voted, no problem.
So give us some more, information about the process, the adventure. You finished school in Salt Lake City, and then you went away to college, right?
I went to Georgetown University in the School of Foreign Service. I spent a semester in Budapest, right as it was transitioning from a one-party state to a multi-party democracy, and of course the change in the economic system.
Yes.
After that, I worked for a year in Washington, D.C. as a legal assistant, and then I went to the American Graduate School of International Management, Thunderbird, where I got a master's in international management, and I worked for a Greek-Bulgarian joint venture in Sofia, which was fascinating. I had a great interest as a student at Georgetown in the Greek-Bulgarian dynamic, because I find so many things in common between the two peoples, and yet we've been constantly, until recently, at daggers drawn. I afterwards went to law school for 3 years, didn't particularly like it, and then I went back to Salt Lake and worked in the family business until I got into banking, and banking took me to Chicago. I met my wife in Chicago. We lived for a while in Milwaukee. We came back to Chicago. We moved to Greece, where I worked for ABN AMRO Bank in Greece. I also had to do a short stint in the Greek army. After a couple of years of the, as we'd say, Helleniki pragmatikota, the Greek reality, we decamped to London, which was in full crisis mode. Our first child was born in Chicago, our second in London, and then we lived 3 years in Serbia, in my wife's hometown, before in 2013 coming back to Chicago. So.
And now you are involved where?
Well, now for 4 years we lived in Chicago, and I mostly did legal work, mostly freelance legal work, and some real estate work. And then we decided to, both for tax and lifestyle and weather reasons, like so many Chicagoans, we moved south. And we moved to Clemson, where after a year working here, a lot of it also doing freelance legal work, I started a master's program in history, but I also was teaching part-time. I'm now, I just defended my thesis last week, so that is done. But for the past 2 years, I've been working full-time at Clemson's Honors College and in the political science department. So what I teach really has nothing to do with history, but I do draw on experiences in history, experiences abroad. My classes tend to be generalist classes looking at culture and technology, and being able to draw on the experience of living in so many places. If my evaluations are to be believed, makes for an interesting class, and I've never been happier in terms of my career, and you can appreciate that because.
Yes, of course. And in this very cosmopolitan and very, you bring this sense of universality with the travels and studies, the sense of a Renaissance man, studying various things, and also finding time and energy to write books. Behind me, I have 2 of your books. I know you have more, but those are the 2 that I have. The Hidden Mosaics, which is like a novel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the other one, which was the first one, is the eagle and the 2 faces of the eagle you talk about. The Balkan countries, but we'll come to that soon. From your description and your travels first in the States and then to Greece, the questions are that first, if you saw any similarities or differences among the different Greek American communities in the different cities that you lived, how similar or different was Salt Lake from Chicago? Or now in
Greenville, yes.
In Clemson, which is a very historic university there. It's Clemson, and what they try to do with agriculture and all this, nature and science. Very interesting place in Carolina. So how, if you see, if you think that
I do
different, or
I do. I do. First of all, what's very interesting about Greek American communities is they tend, even very large ones like Chicago, often they tend to have dominant topographic locations in Greece. So, for example, I alluded to it in Salt Lake City, the Cretans are the largest population, and you'll have Cretans even into the 5th generation that are very conscious of being Cretan. Even if they don't speak Greek, they will know Cretan dances. They, particularly in this era, lots of them will go back. And Salt Lake, because of the Mormon majority, particularly in the past, now Salt Lake has become very diverse. It's very much a mosaic. But when we were growing up, and of course the earlier generations, the Greek community, I think, was quite cohesive because it was also in an area where there was a very dominant religion, with certain similarities. They were very family oriented. They were very faith oriented. They felt themselves culturally distinct. So if anything, we were like in the old Ottoman millet system. We had our millets, the Mormons had theirs. Often we would get along great. You know, I've got close friends who are Mormons. I'm a business owner in Salt Lake. I've got a great deal of respect for the work ethic there. So that's Salt Lake. I lived in Washington, D.C. There, it was a more mixed community in terms of origins, lots of focus on international organizations. You know, it was more transient, but there was also an old kind of old guard there that was interesting. Chicago was fascinating in that I had once done some research and written an article, I think for Nails Cosmos in Melbourne. Chicago, they estimated about a third of Chicagoland's population. Let's just do a rough estimate of, say, 100,000 are from villages around Tripoli in the Peloponnesos. And another third are reckoned to be of a wider Peloponnesian background, and then the rest of Greece, you know, Macedonia, the islands, Crete, you know, kind of a smattering. So that was very interesting. I also found that certain communities were very insular in Chicago, and not particularly they didn't really follow philoxenia. They often were made up of people that almost came from the same village. I remember my daughter was in Greek school there, and my wife and I were both working, and I came late for Greek school, and this woman said, well, why don't you have your parents pick her up? I said, my parents are both dead. Well, what about your wife's parents? I said, they're both in Serbia. I said, my whole village didn't emigrate here, which, okay, was not the nicest thing to say, but I said it because there was almost an assumption that, you know, that's what's normative. Now here in South Carolina, the Greek community in Greenville is very, you know, there's lots of marriage with non-Greeks. I mean, that's the norm. That's completely the norm. There's lots of converts. It's easily one of the most welcoming communities. They're very interested in bringing new Greek Americans in, or you know, fellow Americans of other faiths. So I couldn't be happier. And then I've also spent some time in on the west coast of Florida, and I'd say, if anything, that is probably because you have the authentic enclave of Tarpon Springs, and then you have a diaspora from Chicago and New York, you know, the northern states. I think that's probably the new center of gravity of American Hellenism. And there's a lot of authenticity, and yet there's also a lot of assimilation. You've kind of got the entire spectrum. Whereas in a place like Greenville, which is the community next to Clemson, it tends to be earlier immigrations. But there's a few of us who you can hear by their accents, and because of my accent, they call me a real Greek because it sounds like I'm from Greece. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of my perspective on it.
And overall, you see that will be a continuity to the Greek American community in the next generations, because according to the latest census, as well as the previous one 10 years ago, for the first time, the American-born generation is numerically more than the Greek-born. And as you said, with intermarriages and living in the ghettos and being dispersed in other different neighborhoods with other groups, so therefore the assimilation will be in faster pace. How do you see the future of the Greek community?
Well, I think there will be assimilation. I mean, I certainly look at my own children. I mean, primarily identify as Americans rather than Greeks or Greek Serbian. You know, and again, at least there you have a common, I'd say, Byzantine cultural milieu as well as Orthodoxy. So I think that's inevitable. I don't think that the Greek Orthodox Church really knows how to handle this. I also think that the church is not the only vessel for Hellenism. And I also, because I've lived in Greece, and while I may be religious myself, I tend to take both a very European view of religion, that it's something that is private. I remember in Greece, I never talked about religion. In South Carolina, you talk about it all the time. So I take a Jeffersonian view, you know, ask not of my religion, it's known to God and me alone. And I have lots of friends who are Greeks who are very secular. And they often tend to be some of the most knowledgeable culturally about Greece. And I think that solely focusing on the church is problematic, though I personally am religious, if that gives you an idea. The other thing, and the reason why I'm really emphasizing the study of the old commercial diaspora, is they were asymmetric, they were small numbers, they were culturally engaged, but they also had a constant outflow to assimilation. So if anything, the lessons we can learn from the Trieste community, Vienna, Manchester, you know, you name it, even New Orleans, you know, the oldest church community, which seems to have been forgotten by its very archdiocese. I think those give us an idea of what is going to be the future, and you know, understanding the future. And let's face it, the homeland now is becoming a much more diverse place. You know, the most famous Greek in the world is a 6'5" first generation Greek from Nigeria. So we need to be conscious that this is happening, but I think Hellenism, both as Hellenism and Romagnocini, has an opportunity. But I don't believe that opportunity is being leveraged by Greek America. I think that, you know, there's a few of us crying in the wilderness, you know, our colleagues in EMCA, some of the folks at Aragon, and then lots of great individual Greek Americans who may not be as involved in the discussion as you and I think that those people need to speak up more, because I don't think the current organizations speak for us, if you know what I'm saying.
And also, since you're a scholar, among other things, the dominant or the prevailing approaches or theories within the Greek American literature and studies, it is that in order to remain Greek, you have to be a Greek Orthodox. So it is through religion now. Either it was Charles Moskos in his writings, or Scurby, Alice Scurby in her writings, right? So this is the dominant narrative, and it's very interesting that you bring you know, a different narrative that is not exactly like this. It can be many other parameters or variables that can somehow form or play a role in ethnic identity. What I think is that, and I don't know what is your position on that Greek Americans, they don't have a chance going to school to learn about Greek American history or literature. Do you feel that this is a time to start talking about?
I think it is. I think also that we're focusing too much on numerics and numerical uptick rather than we're focusing on quantitative rather than qualitative.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also we have an interest as a community only to talk about good stories, success stories, and success stories tend to be financial and not necessarily wider community successes. And also both, and I think this is also true of Greeks in Greece and Greeks here, there is a decided lack of self-criticism, which I find, frankly, problematic, because then you only, you almost, I think of Greek America almost as an echo chamber, where the stories are success, family, you know, rags to riches. Now we're a success. We want to minimize, you know, family dysfunctions. We want to minimize, you know, for example, the labor movement that Greeks, like other European immigrants of the time, played a prominent part. I mean, if you look at other ethnicities, you know, Italians, Irish, certainly our Jewish fellow citizens, they're able to talk about in a much more holistic way about their American experience. Now, these are larger communities than ours, but we should have the articulateness and sophistication to do this. And I really detect there is an unwillingness to open an autocritical set of fora in Greek America, if that makes sense.
Well, if you keep pushing as you do, there is a hope. So the other part is that how difficult or easy was the decision to go to Greece and Europe for work and other things you did?
It was very difficult. It was because I didn't know what Europe meant. My wife did, and she was less enthusiastic because she had a cultural frame of reference that she knew what repatriation meant. And then, by the way, of course, we repatriated into Serbia too, and saw some similarities. It basically was, I used to say it was the dream that never came true, but I had an opportunity to head a division in ABN AMRO, and I took it. It also required me to go for a couple months of military service, which I felt, well, this is what the law requires. And, you know, I was raised by a veteran. You know, all of my male line were veterans, so why not? You know, that's your duty. And I think one of the best things was to be under arms.
Veterans in the American Army?
No, in the Greek.
In the Greek Army?
Yes. On my mom's side, all of her uncles were, you know, American veterans, but, you know, I've got a long history of course, they were all in the Navy, and I was, of course, a disappointment, stratoxiras, you know, so they made the decision. It used to be that Hydriots would go to the Navy, and now, you know, the logic of the Greek state is well, the logic of the Greek state.
So working in the Balkans is a very, you know, interesting case, a very complex situation, or very misunderstood also. There is a lot of, let's say, paranoia how other Europeans see the Balkans, right? Is also an expression. It's like a salad, right? A Macedonian salad, you know. So is this a reality, or it is technically a propaganda to create situation for the Balkans?
Well, I think, first of all, I think that Greece struggles with its Balkan identity, which to me, I think we're kind of the culmination of the Balkans. I mean, a lot of the cultural reasons there exist to Balkans is because of Byzantine Orthodoxy.
Yeah, and also one of the forerunners of the Greek War of Independence, Rigas Phareos, his vision was the Balkan democracy, right? The
yes.
unification of Balkan.
Well, and I think too that if anything, ironically, the Turks, before they knew they needed to start dividing the Balkan peoples, fostered it by putting us all under the same millet. So basically, you did not have, you had constant marriage across ethno-linguistic lines. You had people who were multilingual and illiterate that were mixing their languages together. Because I speak Serbian and Bulgarian, less than Serbian, and Greek, even though the languages are different branches of the Indo-European. Bulgarian and Serbian are Slavic, South Slavic. Greek is, of course, its own. The grammars are identical. The mental constructs are identical, and you can basically plug and play words back and forth. So I learned Serbian very quickly because grammatically and in terms of its mental constructs, it was very similar to Greek, in spite of being very different linguistically. And then, of course, you had all the Turkish words. You had tons of loan words both ways. I mean, we forget the degree of intermixture between the various Balkan states. And I think one thing that Yugoslavia was very good at is, before it was destroyed, was celebrating some of the diversity, in spite of, some of the heavier hands, in parts of the Yugoslav story. So I think the Balkans, the other thing that the Balkans suffer from is we're all viewed as second-class Europeans. And we're also under threat from the East directly. And I think that the Balkan card as a unifier, as opposed to a divider, has never been exercised by anyone, by any Balkan state. And given Greece's cultural role, and also the role, for example, of Greece's diaspora business class, I think this was a singular failure. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, because to me and many other people, I believe that Greece for a long time was the only Balkan country that was also a member of the European Union, and also a member of NATO. And many people thought that that should be a situation to be exploited in a good sense, to be the leader in financially, culturally, and unify the Balkans and help the rest. But instead, we're isolated from the other Balkan countries, or the nationalistic ideologies, etc. A big question, that created a lot of conflict and let's say opposing views to the extreme, was the agreement with what we call now North Macedonia, Skopje. So what is your take on that? Because this is a very crucial question still for a great deal within the Greek American community, and also in Greece, of course.
Okay, it's interesting. I wrote for New York's Neo magazine an article in support, which I got a lot of flack for from Greek Americans. First of all, and Greeks in Greece, but some Greeks in Greece understand the subtleties of it. In my opinion, the Macedonian issue is not about the heritage of an ancient kingdom. It's about how to divide up the Rum millets, the Orthodox peoples of the Balkans, particularly of that area, because that's where Hellenism and Slavdom mix. It's very much a fruit salad, and turn of the 20th century, you would often have multilingual people whose nationality was basically, well, I'm a Romios, I'm a Rum. And their nationality might be determined if they go to a Serbian school or a Bulgarian school or a Greek school or even a Romanian school if they were blacks. So it's not about, in my opinion, about the legacy of Alexander the Great. I think that that has been a costly narrative because we focused on that, because we have this obsession over the heritage of the ancients in Greece, and suddenly you had another claimant. I think it's more about how do you divide this area, and how do you account for the emergence, whether that emergence was based on the assistance of mass education in the Yugoslav state, whether that was real belief in a separate identity, whether that was also fostered by our very own Greek state in order to counter Bulgarian national feeling, which we never talk about, how we were using the term in order to adhere people who spoke this language but were Greek Orthodox, adhere them to Greece. I mean, how do you divide that up? I think by using a geographic qualifier that says this is not speaking for the whole of Macedonia, it is speaking for a part. It's a regional qualifier. It was, well, I think the Greek ambassador when he came to Clemson said, it's a great solution because everyone was dissatisfied by it, if that makes sense. The only thing I would have liked is a qualifier on the language and the nationality, to say Slav Macedonian or North Macedonian. Beyond that, I think strategically too, Greece gains big advantages by patrolling the skies over North Macedonia. It also basically is a punt. Now the Bulgarians have to deal with the identity issue, not us. So I think in hindsight, it's a win, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see the first book. When this book came about and how the eagle has two faces, journeys through Byzantine Europe. This is I think your first book, right? This is your first book.
Correct.
And for me personally, it took me a long time to start understanding and realizing Byzantium. Why Byzantium is so problematic for the Greeks, and not only. I read a lot, and among the books that I read was Arveler's attempt to reinstate the importance of Byzantium and Judaism. Why we Greeks are very, very how we should put it, mystified or not very sure about Byzantium?
Okay, I think it's because the marketing of the modern Greek state, or the marketing imposed by the modern Greek state, emphasized a face of Greece that would be more Western friendly, because a Byzantine Orthodox Greece doesn't really inspire Hellenism like classical Greece, particularly in that era of Enlightenment, in an era where people all over Europe are looking less at religion and religious identity. They're looking at classical Greco-Roman norms as somehow pure. I teach political science, and I hear hearkenings to ancient Greece and Rome. It was a better it was a much more effective marketing of a new poor state to be descendants of the ancients than of a civilization that Western Europe did not like. Western Europe actively fought against. There was a vague sense that this would be controlled by Russia, which, again, I've always felt that pro-Russian sentiment in Greece, which does exist, I think it's been damaged a great deal by the current events. But I think pro-Russian sentiment is an overstatement, because I think the Greeks and Serbs, by the way, are very autochthonous. Yes, Russia's the big brother and maybe the mother and everything, but these states are very secure in their Byzantine identity, probably more so the Serbs, because that serves as the font of their civilization. Greeks have to debate what is our center of gravity, rather than looking at Byzantium as the Synechia. They hearken back to Pericles. I mean, it made sense. It was a good idea at the time, but I think it also cut us off from our wider identity. It made it very easy for the Macedonian issue or the Greek-Bulgarian struggle to be spoken of in racist terms. And let's face it, I mean, our cultures are similar. Our DNA is not that different. I mean, the difference between a Greek and Bulgarian is not that different. But and I noticed too that when I write for certain publications, there is a definite preference for Greek, ancient Greek topics. I think it's kind of the echo chamber too. We want something that everyone's going to say, oh yeah, this is what we want and what we like.
Yeah. Before you walk us through your book, it's something you said, and I didn't realize until I saw it in your book, that many of the Balkan countries, they do have as a symbol the eagle.
Yes.
In their flags or in other state seals, etc. And that that was a good thing to mention. But how it came, how you decided to write a book like this, and about
well, it was, I think that writing should be natural, writing should be opportunistic, and writing should be somewhat mundane. I had lived in Greece. When I wrote this, I lived in Serbia, and my job was basically journalism. I was full-time writing for various publications. A couple of them are no longer extant. For example, the Hellenic Voice, which was a great publication out of Boston. The story was all around me, and I lived in a part of Serbia with 24 nationalities, right up against the Hungarian and Croatian borders. So there was a real sense of being in a borderland where the identity of East Rome and Habsburg, of Orthodox and Catholic, of Slav, Byzantine, and Magyar, or Western Slav, more Roman Catholic Slav, were abutting against each other. So it was a rich place to draw inspiration from.
You wrote the book after the American intervention in Yugoslavia and the bombings in Serbia, right? So, so you've been there. If people knew that you're also an American, it was something that it was a negative connotation there, or they saw also that you're a Greek and that somehow brought a balance?
Well, there certainly was a sense that as a Greek, you're not really a foreigner there. And there was there's clearly ties. But I have to say, I did not detect gratuitous anti-Americanism. you know, the interesting thing about Serbs is they can be very difficult, particularly to one another, but not on ethnic things. There's a certain, I remember I was in line at the doctor's, and I was at an ear, nose, and throat specialist, and a fellow who had been injured in the bombing and had, had some, cranial injuries. He said it happened in the bombardment, and he knew that I was American, but there was literally no sense of animus there at all. So no, I can't say that there was any sense of animus there.
So let's see the places you visited. Serbia, Romania, right?
Mhm.
Also, you talk about this book about Macedonia. Again, here you have it. And then you, for Greece, you talk about Mistras, right?
Yes.
So how you connect in your journey, how you connect all those places? It is the cultural or the chronological developments of the empire, or the exchanges that happened, because it was some kind of immigration also. A lot of people moved to the Peloponnese, and they became Greeks at some point, right?
Yes.
So,
Well, there were all of those demographic shifts back and forth, particularly when we were all basically one people, the Orthodox of the Balkans. And then, of course, you had the common culture of Byzantium. And you're talking about a 1,000-year history that then the Turks basically froze in suspended animation by keeping us as Byzantines. So it was a lot more natural than it was quite natural. And obviously, as you're going along the peripheries, southern Italy, northern Serbia, Transylvania in Romania, you start to see the contrast, but you also see where Greeks and Serbs played a big role in the development of these states. Like I wrote recently, again, another article, Silent Partners to Empire, the Greeks and Serbs who built the Austrian and Russian empires. So, our peoples were involved in the building of the West as well.
yeah. So in your book, you go through various travels, and then you end up to Constantinople. And I thought that would be the final chapter, and then surprisingly, in a good sense, came you talk about Pontus, and a very dramatic title you have, the sacrificial lamb. So
what's the why on that? The why on that is my brother-in-law's family were from Kavala, but from Ordu in Pontus, and his older brother once had suggested that somehow they paid the debts for the existence of the Greek state. Okay, obviously he has his opinion, and I understand it, but I felt that it was worth mentioning that in the consolidation of the Greek state, there were huge demographic and geographic and cultural losses. And Pontus is that story. And yet the legacy, there was I think it was in Serbia, an old Serbian who mentioned that the land never forgets its children. Right? So Pontus has not forgotten its children. And I think that Turkey struggles with that greatly, because DNA comes out too many, that I think of when President Obama said something about, you didn't build that, and people, basically took him to task, suggesting that, I'm not self-made. Well, look, the problem is Erdogan knows that Hagia Sophia, which he turned back into a mosque,
Yeah.
they didn't build that. Okay, so, but what was built was a cultural space that exists, that remains, and that's what I talked about. And I think it's unfortunate that Greeks don't realize just how living this heritage is. If that makes sense.
What is the timeline for this book? How long it took you to write this book? You were writing as you were traveling, you keeping notes, and you go somewhere else later and write the book.
All of the above.
How the process? Yeah.
Basically, most of the time, my companion was my daughter, who still is my favorite companion. She was just a baby at the time, and sometimes it'd be a cafe in Serbia, and of course Serbs love their cafes, just like Greeks do. So she'd be in the stroller, or as she got older, she'd be sitting up. It would be trips to Greece, trips to Hungary, trips to Austria, trips to Italy, and just put it together. I mean, as I look back on the writing, it's definitely a cruder version of the writing I do now, but it's a very important time capsule for me. And I think that I think people can pull almost anthology-like value from it.
I don't know if you have a favorite chapter or passage, but let's read a couple of pages that you like. I would like to document your voice, your reading, and also you're a good photographer. You took your own pictures to the book. Yeah.
Sometimes,
yes.
Yes. Sometimes. What do you want to write about? I also have to be conscious of my time.
Yes, we still have time until 1. I know you have a meeting.
Yes, my meeting changed to 12:45. So if we're able to
let's
do
read,
like by 12:30, it would be good.
Absolutely. We would like to keep you more, but yeah.
Well, and I love this. This is
maybe
this hit the spot.
Maybe in the future we'll have more time. But let's read whatever you like.
All right. From Mistra, the convent of Pandanasa, with its on page 33. With its delicate, intricate domes and tiled work, beckoned the tourist overcome with thirst and emotion. My 10-year-old eyes widened when a beautiful nun, clad in black robes straight from Byzantium, emerged with glasses and a timeless amphoric jar of water. I gulped down the vision in the water, and she waited with a patient, indulgent smile to fill my glass again, her doe-like eyes flashing a busy smile. I've always searched for that composite smile, and I found it over 20 years ago outside a Serbian Orthodox monastery in the suburbs of Chicago, built in the late Byzantine style, a copy of the holy monastery of Gračanica in Kosovo. The visage belonged to my future wife.
Wow. Because we discussed it, we mentioned into our discussion what you call Kalimera Nada, Good Day Greece, and the Helleniki Pragmatikotita. I like the way you ended up this part of your book, where you say the diaspora experience is a revolving door for us. Perhaps it is our only true identity. And I found it very fascinating, very poetic also, but also very philosophical and also very sociological.
Well, I think for my wife in particular, even more so for me, my children don't have that problem. They have crossed the Atlantic with more permanence, even though they hold Greek and Serbian nationality. And they've inherited a pretty substantial sense of self. but we are destined to be those people, as are you, Nico.
Okay. Yes, yes. Now, I felt that the two books are connected somehow, although it's a different genre. So this is, you travel, you write, historical. Your other book, although it's like a novel, it is somehow connected because you also involve different cultures, different places, but and also you talk about the Greek-Turkish relations, the role of America, etc. The hidden mosaics. This is your second book, right? So I found that there is some connection there, and of course the interpersonal relationships between a Greek and a Turk who realizes at some point that he has some kind of Greek background, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how the second book came, because as they say, to write the second book it's more difficult than write your first. I mean,
Yes, that actually, I'm very passionate about the second book, more so. My wife and I were in Constantinople in 2007, and we were in the upper gallery looking at the mosaic of Jesus, where he looks like he's drawing breath. And of course, the plaster had been partially removed. And I said to my wife, you see, the truth comes out. Then in Chicago, 2014, 2015, in all honesty, not an easy time for us because we had just repatriated, financially not easy and other things. It was almost a source of solace to write this book. So it was literally done off the side of my kitchen table when I had time, when I wasn't rushing back and forth to my job, my temporary job as a lawyer, or getting the kids where they needed to be, and my wife the same, cooking. I would write this book, and I drew from nostalgias. Certainly the other book was an anthology that I drew from. So I talked about the various parts of the Byzantine story, but it's historical fiction, but it also draws on a truth that I have. My paternal great-great-grandfather was a neophyte into the Orthodox Church in the period after the Revolution. So I knew that was the case. I knew it also because my surname used to be Mehmetis, which son of Mehmet, and my grandfather took his mother's maiden name, the Venetian-derived BILLINIS, to be more Hellenic. So it was based loosely on that story, but I also wanted to to give due respect to the story of the exchange both ways, and the chance meeting that starts the book actually occurred to me. A fellow who resembled me, I was on a Greek tour with my best friend from Greece, and the fellow, a couple of years older than me, the same sort of aquiline nose, green eyes, much receding hairline, comes up to me and offers a few words of Greek, and he says, "Do you speak English?" I said, "Yes." He goes, my grandparents were Cretan Turks." He said, "We are brothers, and God is one, and Allah is one." And then he walked away, and I was practically in tears, and that's where the idea came. So you know how these things are. Sometimes, you could be having a coffee, you could be coming back from a long day. You could have been, you know, needing a break from reality, and the theme just started to flow.
Yeah, and also it is interesting that you also write about Smyrna here
Yes.
in your book, and this year is the 100th anniversary commemoration of the catastrophe.
Mhm.
And do you think that there is a chance that Turkey and Greece start a constructive dialogue, or also do we have a real or a serious Greek or Greek American lobby in Washington, since you lived in Washington, to go to open some channels towards that direction?
No, I don't think so. I think that, first of all, I think that sense of history is not there amongst the lobbyists. They're not built for that. You know, obviously, they've got a lot more experience in government relations, so I can't speak to that. But no, I don't think so, and I don't think it's fully their fault. By the way, I think that Greeks and Turks want that dialogue to take place. Public intellectuals, cultural intellectuals in Greece and Turkey desperately want that dialogue to take place. Greek Americans are kind of absent from that. I think also there's kind of a gratuitous idea that if you're anti-Turkish, you're more authentically Greek, which I don't hold. But I know people who do hold it. I know people in my, my family who hold it. You know, and there I also think my wife, coming from a multi-ethnic, now gone federation, helped in my changing my point of view. But no, in all honesty, I don't think that, and I also think that Erdogan is Erdogan, and we're in an age of dictators right now. And I think that that's not possible. But I think there is a real desire. And I think guys like you and me need to push that discussion into Hellenic American fora.
Amazing. Is something you like to read from this book?
I do. I think that might be an interesting closing. Page 71, where this woman left behind in the exchange because she was ill and her parents entrusted her to a Turk. She found another woman who crossed herself near the ruins of Hagia Fotini, and she followed her, and suddenly the older woman understood why, and said, the older woman put a hand on Fatme's cheek, but she used to be Phaedra. The land never forgets its people. Ionia is our land. Today is Sunday. At this time in the early morning, you will find me here. We can go for walks together. I walk around the ruins of the churches. Sometimes I see others, usually women who are often the wives of well-known Izmiris. It was, she understood immediately after seeing the sign of the cross that this woman was one of her people. You know the sign of the cross. Yes, Effendim. You don't have that's on page 70. You don't have a Cretan or Macedonian accent like so many of the Turks that had been repatriated. You were from Ionia. You got left behind. Yes, I was too sick to travel. Fatme was terrified. She was handing her life to this unknown but obviously powerful woman. The older lady said, you and I are now sisters bound by a secret. So
very, very interesting. Alexandre, thank you very much.
Well, thank you as well, Nico. And at any time, our causes are very much linked.
I think yes, we'll have a chance to continue our dialogue and thank you for the contribution to the Greek American oral history series. And I think this is one of very interesting interview that people can find many different things about identity, diversity, being a Greek, an American, a Greek American, a Balkan, and an Orthodox, because you bring the unity of the Orthodox of the Byzantium. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nico. It was a pleasure, and I'm always here and look forward to seeing you down here or me being up there.
I would love to visit South Carolina. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.